Hi everyone, and welcome to A Seat at the Bar. I'm your host, Skylar Campbell. In today's episode, I had the pleasure of getting to chat with SCDC artists Jillian Vanstone and Jaclyn Oakley. Jillian joined the National Ballet of Canada in 1999 and was promoted to principal dancer in 2011. She is one of the company's leading ballerinas and was the recipient of the Rolex Dancer's First Award for her role in Christopher Wheeldon's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. She is a pristine dancer, and her technique paves the way for her to literally take on anything. Often partners on stage, Jill and I know each other very well, but it was a privilege to learn even more about her in our chat today. Jackie and I joined the National Ballet of Canada together as apprentices in 2009. She is currently a member of the Corps de Ballet and is truly one of the most inspiring people I know and admire on and off stage. As my wife, dancer with SCDC, and the person that I can always count on to organize my thoughts, she has so much to share, and I'm sure this won't be the last time you'll be hearing from her. I spoke with Jill and Jackie about their individual experiences overcoming injury. After learning about what it takes to tackle these challenges, I have so much admiration for their perseverance, and I'm so excited to share our conversation with all of you.
It's everyone's quarantine look. Skylar's hair is getting so long, and
have your mustache.
Going for the mustache look.
And we straightened my hair last night too, or 2 nights ago. Did you see that?
I didn't see that, but I'm doing that to Joe tonight, which is hilarious.
It's so entertaining. I don't know why. That's something that all of a sudden when we have extra time, we're like, ooh, what would your hair look like straight?
Girls always used to do it in summer programs. It was like the pastime, so we've come full circle. So thanks so much for being here. We have Jackie with me and Jillian Vanstone. She's a principal dancer with the National Ballet of Canada. My friend and colleague, and my wife Jackie's here too, sitting right next to me, very close to this microphone because we only have one mic.
It's great. We don't have to social distance because we're in the same house.
We're very close right now. So just before we get into things, I want to kick it off with Jill. And if you can give us a snapshot of how you first began dancing and what brought you to Toronto.
Sure. Okay. So the first experience I had with any kind of dance was when I was 3, and my mom put me in a Parks and Rec program as a week-long summer program for kids. And it was called Movement with Music or something like that, but I decided that was ballet. I don't know where I'd heard of it or anything, but I decided that was ballet, and I was after my parents to let me take lessons after that. And when I was 6, my parents said, yeah, okay, you can take lessons. You're probably old enough to actually pay attention and all of that. And I really liked it. And what brought me to Toronto was when I was about 10, I was at a performance of Royal Winnipeg Ballet. And in their program, there was a pamphlet for their school. And I had no idea there were professional schools for this. I really didn't know how a company even worked or anything like that. But I saw that, and after that, I was really hooked on that idea. And the National Ballet School was doing auditions on Vancouver Island. When I was 12, I went down to Victoria and did the audition and came for the summer program. And again, I really had no idea about the world so much.
Right. You were just kind of like following the steps of what it took, but you weren't necessarily like, oh, like this is what I should be doing. Things just kind of like came in front of you and you were like, oh, that's what I should be doing next.
Yeah, like I didn't have that moment where I saw performance and thought that's what I want to do. I just really liked to do it. And once I found out that I could be more intensive about it, I really wanted to. I went to the summer program at MBS and was accepted. And actually the first year I wasn't quite ready to leave home. At the time, I didn't realize what a risk it was to try to defer it for a year.
Yeah.
But it ended up working out, thank goodness. and came to Toronto when I was 13.
Wow, 13. And your parents were comfortable with that age, leaving home?
I think they didn't want me to have regrets. They
Right.
knew some people whose parents didn't let them pursue what they wanted to do,
Yeah.
and were always wondering and always regretful. And so while they didn't like the idea of sending me across the country, they knew I was in good hands and I was
Yeah.
going to be watched over and taken care of. But they also knew that at least I would know. If it didn't work out, at least I would know.
Right. And you weren't necessarily like going overseas. Like you were still within the country at a reasonable distance, I guess. I mean, it's not super close, but
yeah, it's still to get home, because you go to Vancouver and then jump over to the island. It probably takes about 7 hours. So I could often get to London in about the same amount of time, but from here.
Your home is so beautiful. Like the Vancouver Island is so special. The company did a Western tour. I was a part. I think it was like the last Western tour that we did. I was lucky enough to be on that tour, and we toured to your hometown, and what a special place.
Yeah, I realized how beautiful it was growing up, but I didn't recognize how unique it was.
Until after?
That not everybody had that nature view, and not everybody had the experience of sometimes seeing killer whales or eagles or dolphins or something like that. So, yeah, I grew to appreciate more and more and more the longer I was away from it.
So you joined the National Ballet Canada's National Ballet School at 13. You went through the school. Was it just kind of obvious for you that you were going to be like, oh, the National Ballet of Canada is there. This is kind of like where I want to be? Or when you joined the school, did you even think about being a professional?
Definitely by that point, I wanted to be a professional, and I understood better what that meant.
Right.
Really, when I decided I wanted to be a professional dancer, though, I had really no concept of what
it took, or like what the life was. Right.
Yeah. Anything is. Again, I just liked dancing. And the National Ballet of Canada was one of my top company choices.
Mm-hmm.
And when they took me, I really wanted to be there. I'd grown up watching them, and I admired the dancers, and I liked the repertoire, and I loved the idea that I could dance at a high standard in my home country.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of patriotism involved. I really liked that there was a really high caliber here, and as a Canadian, I could join this wonderful company.
Yeah, it's true. I love that about the National Ballet too. Like they really like pride themselves on being a world-renowned Canadian company, because there are not very many, and to have one of such a high standard with so many incredible Canadians that go and stay in Canada, because that's a big thing too. A lot of Canadians leave, and for you to want to stay and, like you said, represent is so cool.
I feel like it's incredibly trusting of your parents, like in that time, to send you to the school, and like how lucky for you to kind of have had that path available. And I feel like it is nice that NBS is such like a big institution in Canada, and that your parents knew of it, or that it came to your town or near to your town to do auditions and things like that. And it's funny from like an American perspective, both Skylar and I are American. I'm from the East Coast, he's from the West Coast, but there are so many options. But it's interesting where like my parents, who had no background in dance, even though there were just so many options around, they didn't know of them, you know, and there's not like a singular company in the way that there's the National Ballet. So I think maybe the path for dancers that grow up in the States is a bit more scattered, because like we do go to so many summer programs, and there's so many options available. It can be like a little overwhelming for students, and maybe for parents too. And your path seemed very like clear and direct, which is kind of unique compared to our experiences, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like perhaps students and parents have a bit of stress trying to choose the right path. Is that, would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I think so, especially once you're kind of aware of how many options you have. It can be difficult to decide what is the best path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, with the amount of options, it does give a place for everyone.
It does, yeah, which is amazing.
So you joined the National Ballet of Canada, and you rose through the ranks. What was that process like?
It was hard. I wasn't one of those people that very, very quickly climbed.
Right.
It took me 10 years to make it to principal dancer. And I watched people where it took 4 years.
Right. Yeah.
And I know sometimes people take longer than that, but it was a push. I didn't have the idea that it was a guarantee I was making it there. So
right.
Definitely ups and downs.
Yeah. You stuck it out. I mean, it was clear to me that, I mean, I've known you for 10 years and I watched you as an apprentice. And I think you were first soloist and then just got promoted like right within my first 2 years within the company, and always admiring your work ethic and your presence every day, that consistency. Because I love that too within my own work, and seeing that shine so clearly with you it's really awesome. And then to be able to dance with you is even like better.
Yeah, you guys have a great partnership. Yeah. Because I feel like
Jill has so many great partners.
I know,
like,
but I mean, you guys
everyone
have
that dances with Jill is like, oh yeah, it's amazing. Like,
all my boys.
No worries, all your men.
So many men.
So Jackie, what first brought you into the studio? We were talking about this kind of difference between the Canadian dance scene and the American dance scene, and how there's so many more options in America. Mm-hmm. How did you find your path?
Well, similarly to Jill, I didn't have that experience where I went to see the Nutcracker and just was like, Mom, I have to be a dancer. I had no exposure to ballet. I didn't know what it was at all, but my mom did ask me if I wanted to go to a dance class, and I grew up in a small town in North Carolina, and I ended up going to a school called Susan's Dance Unlimited, and we did jazz, tap, gymnastics, like the whole thing, some jazz competitions, lots of sequined costumes and things like that. It was lots of fun, and I really, really loved it, and it was kind of the thing I stuck with. Like, I didn't do too many other activities as a kid. I have a younger brother, and we love to play at home, and I didn't do many sports, though. Like, I kind of did that with him around home, but not with any teams. I later played soccer for a year, but I don't know what that was about. But anyway, I did love dance, and I think I started there when I was 4 years old, so it's quite young. But not until I was maybe 11, the school started requiring us to do like one ballet class a week to improve our jazz technique.
Right. And that's very common of like most small ballet schools.
Yeah, because I think ballet really is a foundation for other forms of dance, and it's just good for technique and coordination and learning how to point your feet and those basics that you need. And I started to really love that one class a week. It was like, oh, can I do more of this and less of the jazz and the tap? And so then I ended up going to the North Carolina School of the Arts' preparatory program, which is like their after-school program for students who are too young to enter the high school program yet. And I was very lucky to grow up like 20-minute drive from that really, really good school. And so I did that, and then I went on to the high school and kind of went through the whole program, which I loved, and it was very intense, and in a lot of ways it operated like a college, and it operated like being in a company. The dance department did. Like, we had all of our technique classes, but we also had tons of performance opportunities, which I know a lot of schools don't have. Like, we performed a season almost structured the way that, like, our company's season is structured. Like, we had, like, a fall program, we did Nutcracker, we had a spring program. So I was really lucky to learn a lot of repertoire, and we did Balanchine ballets, we did Petit Pas, we did a whole range. Like, we learned some Forsyth. Like, I was very lucky to be exposed to all of those things throughout high school.
Was that because of who the Dean of Dance was there at the time, that she brought in all that repertoire for the students?
Yeah, absolutely. Susan McCullough was the dean while I was a student there, and the year after I left is when Ethan Stiefel took over, and then it's been fluctuating since then. But during my time there, we were under the directorship of Susan, and we had a lot of teachers from different backgrounds, teachers that danced for ABT. I worked a lot with Melissa Hayden, who was one of Balanchine's ballerinas, so we had that rep through her, which was incredibly lucky, and to learn from her before she passed was definitely a privilege. But fast forward to graduating from high school, I then did auditions, and I ended up getting a spot at the Boston Ballet's trainee program, which is kind of their top level of the school, but we also get to work with the company a lot in all the full-length productions. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of like a second company, but we weren't paid because we were still students. Right. But I did get to perform in Nutcracker. I did Diamonds, George Balanchine's Jewels with the company. So I had a lot of like cool opportunities, even though I was still a student. And then again, I was there for 2 years, and I did more auditions trying to find a professional position because they didn't take all the students out of that program into the company. There's very limited spots. So I did more auditions, but I wasn't having a lot of luck with that. And then I just happened to be invited to the Banff Summer Dance Festival, which was run by Lindsay Fisher, who's a ballet master here and the director of the apprentice program. And that's actually where Skylar and I met. We were there the same summer. And the end of that summer, Lindsay approached me and said, "Hey, I have a spot in the apprentice program. Are you interested?" And I was like, the National Ballet of Canada was never really on my radar. You know, like I said, there's so many options in the States, and it wasn't really on my list. Like I didn't really know about it. Not that I wasn't interested, but I just wasn't really aware of it so much. Right. And at that point I was like, oh yeah, if you're going to pay me to dance, I'll be there. You know, I really just needed a job, you know? Yeah. So that was the situation for a lot of students, you know, when you're 18, 19 years old, just like, I just want to go to a company. So the more I looked into it, I was like, oh, this is amazing, you know, and the apprentice program was incredible.
Yeah, we learned a lot, and we got to know each other well that summer. Although nothing happened.
We were just friends for a really long time. We became really good friends because we both joined the apprentice program here that year following that summer. And yeah, I loved the program that year. I learned so much. We, you know, danced a lot of our own rep at outreach shows and also got to dance with the company. And I remember towards the end of that season, we were doing Swan Lake. And I was not cast to go on, but of course, all the apprentices understudied everything. And someone got injured in a matinee, and then our ballet mistress came to me after that show because I was just hanging around kind of as a backup. I think I was watching the show. Right. And she's like, "Do you think you could go on tonight?" And I was like, "Tonight, like in 2 hours?" And I don't know. To this day, I cannot tell you how I instinctually just said yes, but I did. I don't think I even thought about it. Wow. Because it was not the spot that I'd learned in Swans. And so it was asking a lot also of a young dancer, throwing them in. I mean, that was a lot of trust for her to have asked me. Definitely. And I just said yes. Yeah. And then we had like an emergency rehearsal, like half hour before the show, of course, just so that I wouldn't crash into anybody. And then I went in for the White Swan corps that night. And on the way home after that show, I just have this like distinct memory of being on the subway and just being like that just happened. Like something like very transformative and like important in my life just happened. I was like looking around at the other people like on the subway platform being like, nobody has any idea that like my life just changed. Like this was incredible.
Wow.
And then I went on to do the rest
so
of the
cool.
shows because the girl wasn't able to finish the run of shows. And so that was a big moment for me here in this company. And then shortly after that, Karen Kane, our director, offered me a contract in the Corps. So I have a like really strong connection with Swan Lake as a ballet, and I've done it so many times, as we all have throughout our careers. Yeah. But I feel very strongly connected to that moment. And
that was my. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Go ahead.
It was my first show with the company with Swan Lake as well.
Oh, amazing! Yeah, it's so powerful.
The apprentice.
Yeah.
So Karen offered you a contract, and then that summer you got in a serious car crash.
Yes, and that's my big experience with injury. And it came very soon in my career, really before my career even started, because I was just hired. I had signed the contract. I went home to visit my parents for the summer, and then this car accident happened, and all of a sudden I was not able to fulfill that first day as a Corps member, which was devastating.
We'll touch back on that because I want to ask you so many questions about your experience with that injury. Jill, what has your experience been with managing injuries? Because it's a hot topic in the world of dance and articles. I've read so many articles, so many different podcasts talk about it, and there's a lot of different approaches. And I want to talk to both of you about this topic because I find it really interesting hearing people's perspectives. When were you first kind of faced with a serious injury, Jill?
Well, I sort of joke that I've been really gung-ho about any injury that I've had. I haven't had a lot, but when I've done them, I've really done them. So I actually had a surgery on my ankle. I had a bone chip that I think it happened when I landed a jump in performance. And it was one of these things, I'd been given a soloist role and everything had gone really well. And it was sort of this point where I thought maybe this was going to open the doorways for other things. And in the last performance, there was something that wasn't right. And in the end, after a few months of trying everything, I had to have a surgery to remove this bone chip. And it was the first time that I was off with a long injury. And I think the biggest thing I learned at that time, which then I carried to a later big injury, was really making sure I asked for help from people. I think so much of, I don't know if it was something I put on myself, or I imagined that I had to be tough and never show weakness. And I had this idea I had to figure everything out for myself. And this was an instance where I really couldn't do that. And so I really sought out anyone that could help me either with physio or with rehab, cross-training, that sort of thing. And in the end, the hardest part was actually going from being medically cleared to getting back to ballet.
Right.
Because I was kind of told, okay, go back to class. But I didn't know how to build properly, and trying to do pirouettes before I could balance and passe, that sort of thing. And the company ended up going on tour, and because I wasn't back yet, I wasn't going. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? And there had been a guest teacher who I had really liked, who was coaching in Winnipeg. And so I called him up and I said, well, could I come and work with you to help me come back from this injury?
Oh, okay.
And going to work with him was the first time somebody really showed me how to step by step come back.
And that's a pretty big jump. I mean, so you were experienced within the company in this first injury with the bone chip.
Yeah, I've been at the company 6 years.
6 years, okay. And then, so you took it upon yourself to then seek out extra help because you wanted the best. And
I was a little bit lost.
right.
And I was just trying to do things and I was failing. And I mean, initially it was sort of finding out by accident, because initially I just thought, I need somebody to work with. I need somebody to do class with, and the company's gone.
Right.
And I just remembered him. I liked his classes, but he knew how to really, really build somebody back. And that was what he taught me. And I'd gotten really strong in the gym and I'd done all of those things, but building back to ballet was a missing step that I didn't know how to do.
Yeah.
And so that was something that I carried with me later, when I had an even bigger injury and I dislocated my kneecap and actually thought my career was maybe over. And
oh my gosh.
I was thankful that I knew how the process could be, because the first time you have a big injury, it's so scary. You don't understand the days that you have setbacks. You think you've done something wrong. You don't know what's too much, what's too little, all of that. And so at least I had a little bit of an idea of how the process goes, but I also knew that I needed to ask for help wherever I could and really go to the people that I knew could help me in various areas, because you can't just figure it all out on your own.
Would you say you took the second injury with more caution and time than the first? I mean, they're completely different injuries. I know that, but there's this medical study done with the New York City Ballet, and it was found that dancers who had serious injuries in the past practiced better work habits than newly injured dancers. So
I mean, that makes sense.
And so they knew how to like cross train better, rest on their days off, massage and other different like rejuvenating treatments. So you had it. Yeah, I mean, 6 years into the company, you're pretty well experienced. It's not like you're brand new and you're newly injured, and then all you want to do is get right back into the studio and not know how to take the steps.
Yeah.
So this knee injury seems a lot more serious.
Yeah, I mean, I really, when it initially happened, I looked at my leg and it looked a mess, and the first thought I had actually was, it's over, it's all over.
Oh my God.
And I was terrified.
Yeah.
It was horrible. And so I certainly took my recovery very seriously. I mean, I dialed in right away, and from diet to doing brain training games and or exercises games, whatever you want to call them, to from the very first day trying to figure out, okay, my leg's in this brace, but what can I do? What am I able to do? And then I also gave myself permission to have days where I sat on the couch and felt sorry for myself, because that's important too.
Yes.
And I watched TV all day and felt like a lump and had that moment, and then could get back on with it. But I mean, I think those days are important too, that you're allowed to feel down and you're allowed to not do something on some days, as long as the general trajectory is going towards recovery. But and I spent a lot of hours of the day doing all the things I needed to do to bring me back. And I probably some of the things weren't all that useful at all. And I think out of fear, I probably threw some money at things that weren't necessarily effective, kind of snake oil business, which was another lesson to learn.
But you can write it off on your taxes, so it was justifiable.
Yeah. Exactly. But absolutely, I knew better what I needed to do, what the process was with the second go around.
So your injury was dance related, and now I want to kind of swing back to Jackie really quick. Hers was not. And you had that kind of like, the second injury for you was like that moment of realization, like, oh shit, like this is bad, where you can actually, you saw it and you were like comprehending what was happening. Jackie, talk to us about your car accident and what that was like for you.
Yeah, it's interesting because you would think in a circumstance where I mean, my friend was driving the car and I was sitting in the front passenger seat, and we were T-boned into my door. So essentially I was like crushed inside of the car. And I was unconscious until I woke up in the hospital. So I don't physically or with my own eyes know the details. But I do know from, what I've heard of what the scene looked like, that the firemen had to, cut the car open and pull me out and do all these things that sound like a TV show. But that's really is the reality of those kind of situations. And so waking up in the hospital, I didn't exactly know what had happened, but somehow my brain knew I was in a car accident. And my very, very first thought was, is my friend okay? I was not concerned about myself.
Wow.
I didn't think at all. And
you just thought about her.
I was like, where is she? Yeah. Is she okay? I need to know. Somebody needs to tell me what happened to her. 'Cause I didn't see her. It was just me and doctors. And they were like, she's fine. Don't worry about her. And she was fine. She had whiplash, but she was not in the condition that I was in. Right. I didn't realize how bad my injuries were. I was in a neck brace. My hip was broken. I had a fracture in my pelvis. My foot was broken. A rib was broken. I had fractured C1 and C2 in my neck. So I was in rough shape, which I did not immediately understand. And once I knew my friend was okay, I was like, oh, okay, and this situation is serious, and I'm in a lot of pain, but I'm like super bummed right now that I'm going to miss Serenade because that was meant to be the first ballet that we were going to do that season that I was joining in the corps. And it's also my favorite ballet, so I was like really excited about it. But that was my scope of what I thought the injuries were. It was like, oh, I'm probably not going to make it back for like October, November performances. Yeah. And the car accident happened in August, the beginning of August. And then obviously over time, I was informed that was not the case and that I was going to be missing a whole lot more than Serenade. And over the following months, I rehabbed at home with my doctors in the hospitals there in North Carolina because I was home visiting my parents when this happened. And it was a slow process. Like, the neck brace was probably the worst part, like having to be very stationary, and I was in that for 4 months, which is something that I feel like I can't even describe. It was just very restricting, and it caused so many other things that you wouldn't think about. Like, yes, I was in a lot of pain and I couldn't move, and I was kind of like, I spent a week in the hospital, and then when I went home, I was kind of in bed for a month. Also because of the fractures in my hip, I couldn't walk. So it was kind of overwhelming and something that felt like it came from the outside onto me. It wasn't like I was dancing and I sprained my ankle and I hadn't had experience with injuries like happening in the studio or on stage at that point.
You were so young.
And I mean, we all have aches and pains and things, but I hadn't had a big injury.
So your idea was like, oh, I'll just be back in the studio or be back for, the March season. And
yes, until I realized I didn't know how to walk anymore. Right. And then that set in. I was like, oh, I need to relearn how to walk. Like, I cannot bend my knee. I don't know how to bend my knee. And there was nothing wrong with my knee.
Right.
It's because my hip was broken. And so I had to, when those bones healed, repattern how to walk. So it was like from a very basic level of like rebuilding the body and like very simple, everyday physicalities.
So you spent quite a bit of time at home rehabbing at your hospital in North Carolina. Yeah. Then for Jill, she said she found a teacher and kind of went off onto her own because this particular teacher kind of had a system and a program. Did you do anything like that?
I did. It's funny what Jill said about feeling like there was this gap between being cleared by your doctor and making it back into the studio. And I think that is probably pretty universal for dancers that get injured, because I hear that from friends even now in the company that have injuries, that there's this gap between like for example, my physical therapists in North Carolina were really satisfied that I was walking with no limp, that my neck brace was off. We were slowly working on neck mobility, because even after those 4 months with the brace on, as soon as I got it off, turning my head even a few degrees to the right or left was not possible. It's like, well, how am I going to dance if I can't move my head? Like, it's not possible.
Wow.
But the doctors were satisfied with even the smallest bit of progress. They're like, oh, you're walking, like, it's wonderful. And they were like, oh, you're so flexible. I'm like, you have no idea. You have no idea, like, the level at which I need to be able to be physical, to return to, like, what is my whole life, you know, my job, my whole existence, my identity, how I had, like, grown up to be just like a person in the world was as a dancer. I didn't know anything else. And I think also being very new and young at that time, that's like, it's all I had. And so I did have to kind of advocate for myself, because my parents didn't know either. They did their best, and they took me to great doctors, and they were super supportive through those tough times where they would see me try to, you know, go on the elliptical, and I would last 3 minutes. And then I'd be crying because I was exhausted. Yeah. And that seems like a lifetime ago now. But
thank goodness.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I think I've compartmentalized my life in that way, where I think of this whole experience as like a whole other section. But in that time, once my doctors did clear me, and I didn't have any surgeries, luckily, and they felt that my C-spine was stable enough. They were like, if you want to try to dance, that's your decision. They weren't super excited about it, but I was very much in the mindset that this is what I'm doing, and I'm not going to question it, and I'm going to push for it no matter what. Like, I was very tunnel vision towards making it back to dance in that time. And so I reached out. I don't think I reached out. I think your parents reached out to me. Yeah. And for Jill knows this, but for our listeners that don't know, Skylar's parents own a Pilates studio. His mom and his stepdad, called Connect Pilates, and it's in Southern California, where Skylar grew up. And Skylar and I were just friends at the time, but his parents had heard of my situation, of the accident, and we had met a couple times before, just during our apprentice year. And they very generously offered to help me rehab, which was exactly what I needed. It was Pilates, it was dance conditioning, it was strength training. It really bridged that gap for me between, like, being healthy enough to start rehab and gym outside of, like, the physical therapist being like, you're cleared to walk, and then making it back to the studio. And they were dancers, so they knew what it required to make it back to the studio.
So with them, they were just focused on the physical side of your rehabilitation, because at that point you had kind of rehab to be a person
yes.
in the world.
Yes.
And then you needed that cross training, the conditioning.
I needed to bridge that gap, like Jill did when she found a teacher. Yeah.
So you did it with sort of alternative conditioning, and then you needed to get back into the studio. Yeah. All of this was done just on your account. No one was necessarily telling you that these were the necessary steps to take.
Not at all. I really, like, vividly remember a conversation I was having with my parents at home one day. They were like, what are you going to do? And they were looking at me. Yeah. And I was like, well, I'm going to figure it out. You know, I'm not just going to let this go because no one is, like, just putting these options in front of me. Right. And I had to really, like, advocate for myself and fight for that, and also convince my parents in the time, hey, I'm flying to California to work with my friends' parents, and it's going to be great, and I'm going to go live with them for a couple months. Yeah. And, you know, honestly, that is the most like transformative experience that I had throughout my experience in injury, because I think not only did I need a lot of physical healing in that time, I needed a lot of emotional healing.
Well, that's kind of like what I wanted to ask the both of you, like what the psychological approach was. Like, Jackie, did you become more curious about anatomy, for instance, because you broke so many bones? You obviously had to learn about all of those things and what those bones do for you and the kind of repercussions that, you know, it has on, like, you know, your knees or your hip's broken, but we got to focus on these two other things, not the hip. What was your psychological and mental approach, Jill?
Well, with my first surgery, one of the things I sought out actually was a performance psychologist. And the reason I did is because I had witnessed other people coming back from injury. And it was very obvious the people that were coming back, and they didn't have a physical issue anymore. They didn't have a strength issue anymore. They were ready to be back in the studio, but you could see that they were psychologically afraid. And those were the people that didn't come back successfully. And I really didn't want that to happen. So I found a performance psychologist who then, after I had recovered from my injury, anytime I had a bit of a roadblock with performance, I would seek her out. And at the time when I did this, it wasn't really as prominent in the dance world that people might do this. But it was, again, sort of that mentality, like you have to be mentally tough on your own and you have to just push through. And I think because at NBS, there was a lot of talk about how Olympic athletes use that, and you shouldn't just try to push through, even though it was still kind of in the culture at the time, a culture of dance. And then certainly when I was coming back from my knee dislocation, because that had been a lot more traumatic as an injury and was so incredibly painful that I had a lot of fear that I had taken on and built in. And so approaching a professional who really knew how to help me with that was probably the best thing I did out of anything, both times that I was coming back from injury. And then, I mean, you were talking about learning more about anatomy. I feel like I know the anatomy that I know is because of its relation to any injury that I've had.
Yeah, I feel like that's most dancers. Like, we just learn our anatomy from our physiotherapists or from injury.
Yeah, how things feel when you're trying to make them work.
Which I feel like, in my opinion, I think we should learn this stuff. I mean, maybe you learned this in MBS, but I didn't. I didn't go to a, professional, full-time academic ballet school. Which, did you have anatomy classes?
Like a little bit. It wasn't
right. It wasn't like
really
robust or anything. Yeah. Anyway, that's,
like it wasn't like.
I feel like that's something we should have, or something that should be offered to dancers, like when they first get into the company. Like, sort of. I mean, I guess we kind of do that.
Like anatomy and how to do your taxes.
Yeah.
Like essentials for apprentices. We can build a program.
I had a funny experience. You know that Body World exhibit? Have you been to that?
Yes.
Yeah,
oh my gosh,
it's incredible.
It's crazy.
So I was so slow going through that exhibit because I was looking for all my injuries.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's that nerve that went to sleep when I had my surgery, and where does that connect to? And
it's so interesting.
My friends were raving at the end, going, "Where were you? We lost you."
Yeah.
I was too busy looking at the tracking of that nerve. But,
I did actually get interested in anatomy. At first, I was very interested in nursing because that was my experience in the hospital. I absolutely loved my nurses, and they made such a positive impact on my experience there in such like a scary moment. I was like, oh, I should become a nurse. And then I also like binge watched Grey's Anatomy while I was bedridden. So
which we still do.
Right. Well,
clearly it has some emotional.
You like connection. It now. You have to admit.
I do like it. Yeah. I like it for all the right reasons.
But then after I ended up taking an anatomy class online because I was very interested in it. And I think the gap that I felt with my physical therapist in North Carolina and them not being informed about dance and not able to help me progress as far as I wanted to in that time inspired me to want to be a physical therapist and to help dancers rehab. So I went through kind of a phase where I was like super inspired to study anatomy.
Right.
And I did like it for a time, and now that's kind of, I mean, it's on the back burner, but I think it's still very interesting.
I agree. I mean, yeah, we still have those anatomy books up in the closet.
We do.
They're
Yeah,
just
my
sitting there.
workbooks.
Should we revisit them?
I think
with all
that's a
this
good
time?
quarantine activity.
We have way too many activities planned.
I think though, like learning how to walk again and like super basics make you really analyze like how the body is put together, and like what we do is very extreme, and it totally makes sense how our bodies can break down while we're dancing.
Yeah, I mean, so these are both unbelievable stories. Personally speaking, I haven't had, knock on wood, a super serious injuries like either one of you have explained. I mean, yes, the odd ankle sprain here and there. I broke my wrist, very dance related, but like, who breaks their wrist in dance? I mean, it's
That's
so
random.
silly. Anyway,
You're unique.
yes. I can imagine that. I thrive on the peer support and the interaction with my colleagues and being around that group, like coming into the studio every day, being a part of a team, having that kind of company atmosphere is really one of the things I love about this profession. And I can imagine not having that or being kind of on the outside, kind of that daily routine of things can be quite difficult. Did either of you find this like wanting to be back in the studio in that way, or did you question like if it was even like worth for Jackie? Clearly not, but I can imagine a lot of people get injured and then just say like it's done, like I don't even want to be back in the studio anymore because it wasn't right for me.
Right. Well, I mean, like Jill, you said when you saw your leg like that, you're like, maybe it's over.
Yeah.
You know, you have that like, what happened? Am I ever going to make it through this kind of feeling? And it's interesting because for me, even though, like I said, I had these like extreme injuries at first, I was like, oh, I'm going to be fine. But even when I realized how bad it was and how long it was going to take me to rehab, I had this like unwavering belief that I was going to make it back, that this circumstance was not going to stop me from kicking off this career that I'd worked so hard for. I'd finally gotten that core contract. It's such a pivotal moment in a young dancer's progression. It's like you finally made it in to this like exclusive club of professional dance, you know? And no matter how many doctors told me you're never going to dance again, I was like, yes, I am. And I had that really like that fire burning inside of me to get back to it, but it felt very lonely. It was just me.
Yeah.
I was the only person who was there saying, you're going to make it happen.
Yes.
And that's also a great part of when I went and trained with your parents, is they were so supportive of that. Yeah. And I mean, from a psychological level, it was like anything from like me getting used to being in cars again. I did that with them.
Yeah.
I was terrified of being in cars. And I think I finally like was able to breathe sitting in a car finally after like driving around with them.
Yeah,
you know, and
you
just
telling me that like you used to never sleep in cars.
No, I wouldn't fall asleep because I was
even
my
before,
eyes were like
even before.
bugging out of my head, like being like super aware, like,
no, but this
are
is
we
even
going to
before
crash?
the accident.
Oh.
Did you ever sleep in cars?
I think I was relaxed. No, I think that was a new thing. I was just like really scared. So I wouldn't let myself relax and like fall asleep in the car because I was just like really tense about it. But anything from like that,
But do
for
you think
example,
that was easier because you were just so removed from the ballet world? Whereas like Jill, how much did you remove yourself? Sorry, I
Yeah,
interrupted
so
you, Jackie.
it's interesting because when you first injure yourself, a lot of people check in with you. And as time goes by, I mean, people have busy lives, and it's nothing against them at all.
That's
but
very true.
Because they have things to do, and so after a while, it feels pretty lonely, and you have a long day to your own thoughts and all of that. But then the flip side of that is, I realize what people must go through when they're ill, because I would come in sometimes into work, and there was a good percentage of people that would look at me with such pity. And I'd kind of be thinking, I'm not terminally ill or something like that. Like, you're looking at me with this look that really isn't helping me at all. Yeah. And funnily enough, that sort of changed how I react to people who are either going through a hard time or are ill themselves or something like that. Because I realized, to such a lesser degree, I didn't have a sickness, I had an injury, and but how unhelpful that was from people. So sometimes going into work felt a little strange. So while you wanted to be around it, it would also feel like you were around it, but still an outsider in a way.
Just from like the way people, approach an injured dancer in the studio, I feel like, it's not, you don't really know how to conduct yourself. Like, personally speaking, so you kind of like felt that from certain colleagues, and you're kind of
you kind of ended up with every person you ran into. How are you? And then you do that.
Well, that's like when you're like crying, you see someone crying, and you're like, oh, it's okay, and then that person just starts crying like even more.
Yeah. Don't ask me if I'm okay.
Yeah.
That's me.
It's all, the thing is, it's all coming from a good place. It's because people care, and that's the lovely thing.
Yeah.
And some people were great about just treating me super normally, and that's fine. But it's hard to be removed from it, and you see everything going along, and people stepping into your place, and everything runs still. And that can be hard when it goes on for a long time. You start to feel more and more removed. But like Jackie, I never had the feeling like I didn't want to get back. I think the times that I struggled with that more was just during a hard point in my career, when I was struggling to improve, or struggling with even the day in and day out of how difficult the profession can be. So sometimes after a while you just start to think, oh gosh, this lifestyle is hard.
So that was almost more draining for you. That sort of process is more draining for you than the actual injury, because you have this kind of like end goal. You're like determined to get back.
You're so focused.
And there's like nothing
very focused.
There's no one in your way other than yourself.
Yeah.
In a way. And then you have that time, I can imagine, to think about, like you were saying, like possible missed opportunities, or different roles that maybe you could have had the chance to dance. There's all these like could-haves and like what ifs.
Yeah, I missed it. Sorry. When I dislocated my knee.
Yeah.
When I dislocated my knee, it was shortly after that Alice was touring for the first time. And this was my biggest role, and it was going to LA, and it was going without me. And that was really hard. And, looking back now, I would have loved to have been on that tour. I went on other tours, and they were great. But at the time, that was just awful that I was missing that. It was so hard.
Yeah, for me, looking back, maybe it was good that I wasn't coming in and out of the studio every day, and I wasn't having that experience. Like, how's she doing?
Yeah.
But at the time, it felt really lonely, and I felt very disconnected from my friends and from like the world that I so badly wanted to be in. And I think there was no Instagram at that time. Like 2010, it hadn't like exploded yet. So
it was probably
that's probably good that I didn't have that all day to stare at and like see what everyone was doing and see even more what I was missing out on. but yeah, I wanted to get back so badly.
So what were the first what were the first moments of you kind of taking those steps to get back into the studio?
Well, after working with your parents at Connect Pilates and with all of their amazing trainers, I then I contacted a teacher of mine that I had in Boston who then had opened his own school just outside of Boston in Brookline called the Brookline Ballet School. That's Karen Ballard and Trinidad Vives. And they let me come in and take classes with them, and I did some private training with them. So that was like fully intensive ballet once I kind of did my cross training, my Pilates, and all strengthening and stuff. I was ready to do more ballet. Right. And so at that point, I mean, the accident was in August. I kind of did that cross training from like February to like April. And then like April, May, June-ish, I was there in Brookline with them training. And after those like 2 or 3 months of doing a lot of ballet, my first experience back on stage was in their like school spring showcase. And I did Corsair Pas de Deux with my best friend Patrick, who was dancing in Boston Ballet. We were training together there. And that was my first time back on stage. And it was so magical to dance with my good friend and like such a beautiful pas de deux, and something that was like hard even on a good day, right? Like for a young dancer.
So this is Patrick Yoakum. He's now a principal.
He's now a principal in Boston Ballet, so cool. And we've stayed in touch, and he was in our wedding, and he's a great guy. And I had so much fun. And it was just like a beautiful experience. Like I did it, you know, like all of that work. Like I got to kind of feel those lights again, and also the support of the whole school. Like I kind of had built that community even with the girls. They were high school students, so they were quite a bit younger than me, but I had that feeling of community again. Of like we're all in the studio and there's people in the wings watching, and I'm out there with people, and like I got to know them really well, and they were wonderful, and I have some good friendships that I formed in that time too, which was what I was really needing in the time as well.
You remember that moment, that first moment stepping back onto stage, Jill? After being off for how many months were you off for?
I mean, it's funny because considering how dramatic the injury was, it's relatively not that long. It was about 5 months with the knee dislocation. And I set myself such a lofty goal that I made it back for the end of the November run of Alice. So the tour had happened and I'd missed that. And I missed the first few weeks, but I came back for Alice, which is probably stamina-wise just as far as sheer stage time. Yeah, it was a big goal. And I did it. So I was pretty.
And after it probably felt freaking amazing, right?
Yeah. I have a photo. I have a photo up at my dressing spot after that particular performance.
I have a photo up of Patrick and I in Corsair too. It's a good reminder. It's like it kind of grounds you. It's like, oh, look, like how hard I had to fight to make it to this one moment. When we take for granted,
big
like
or
a lot
small,
of
big or small.
Yeah, like this was at like the little ballet school spring showcase, but it was such a big deal for me. Yeah, and then getting back to the National Ballet is like a whole nother story for me, and that took a bit longer.
A bit more time.
Yeah.
And then once you found yourself in the company and you got off of the contract again, what was that feeling like? Did you feel a sense of accomplishment, or did you feel like you had to kind of start from ground zero again and improve yourself?
When I first started to take class, I kind of came back just as a guest, and I did a couple productions here and there. I wasn't on a full contract, and that was really exciting for me. I'm back where I want to be, and with the people that I love, my great friends, and the company that I really want to be in. It was exciting to be back in the studio, and to be honest, I felt more confident than ever in that time. I was just like so happy to be there, and I felt like I put the work in, and that I looked really strong, and that I felt good about the work I was doing. And then I had a couple of road blocks along the way to getting that full contract back, and that really broke my confidence. I think because everything's about timing and about what contracts are available and what the company's doing at the moment. And so
I had to audition again. I felt really like exhausted by that process and by hearing no so many times when I felt like I had really fought to be back at the level where I hate to say deserved, but like I felt like I deserved to be there.
Yeah. After that first year of apprenticeship.
Yeah, and after like being offered a contract in the Corps and also like doing those part-time productions and having good feedback while I was there, you know, like I had.
And then it's almost like everyone changed their mind and.
But it doesn't matter because there's not a contract available or this or that, you know. So it just kind of it cuts down that all of that energy that it takes to boost your confidence, because it's so hard what we do even when you're not injured. Like there's so much anxiety and so much
well, like that's what Jill was saying, is after just it's hard, the sheer mental and physical demand daily, monthly, yearly. And
that struggle for getting the job was, I think, almost like emotionally the hardest part of the whole thing. Like, I mean, the pain that I was in, like, you can't even describe. Like, you break your neck. It's something that's like, I can't explain it really, you know. But the feeling of like struggling to get a job, like dancers can relate to that, and that's something that was the hardest part for me. That really like broke me down, I think. But then when it did happen and I was offered the contract in the company again, we were also doing Swan Lake and they had hired me as like an extra swan, and I knew the production. And at that point I was actually really frustrated. And I was like, you know what, I'm just going to do it for myself because I love to dance. And if this is my last little opportunity to dance and then I'm going to give up and do something else, then fine. But I'm going to take this last opportunity to really do this for myself. And maybe that's what did it, you know?
I really remember you preparing for that moment, because at that point we were living together.
We were together.
We had boxes packed.
Oh, things were already sent. Like my belongings
to
were like going to North Carolina.
You were literally, but that's such an interesting moment for me to witness. You believing that this was over and you were ready for it, and then literally at the end of that production,
just like
you got off of that
email
contract,
changes your whole life,
and you were like, okay, I'm back in it. I'm in it to win it. Let's
I'm
go
like,
all in.
let's just go like none of this ever happened. Yeah, and I think to this day I have like the perspective and the appreciation for the whole process.
Do you have moments like that, Jill, where you're just like questioning if this career was right for you?
Well, I think what I ran into, I was really striving for that last promotion. I really wanted to go from first soloist to principal, and I had a lot of doubts within myself. You know, any time I wasn't cast in something, or I felt like I needed to get this role to move forward, or I get something and think, oh, maybe this is my chance. And there was just so much stress involved with all of it. And you know, I was worried maybe I wasn't versatile enough because this really contemporary choreographer didn't put me in their piece or something. And then what does that mean? And funnily enough, I finally got to the point that I was thinking, this whole torturing of myself mentally is terrible and I hate it, and it's making me not like this, and I'm banging my head against the wall. And right about that time was when we had just started rehearsing Alice, and I really liked it. And I had been given this opportunity that was sort of mine to lose. And I thought, you know what, this is just fun. I really like it. I like this type of choreography. I like the whole concept of the show. And I just kind of let it all go. And I thought, who cares? I'm just going to dance this role. And funnily enough, that was a split run, actually. We were doing Alice and then a mixed program and then Alice. And the end of season patrons party, where they do the announcement of promotions and things like that, was happening sort of mid-season. And it was right after the mixed bill was playing. And my parents were visiting, and I was kind of thinking, you know, I go to these parties And I end up disappointed at the end. And I thought, you know what? I've gone every year. My parents are here visiting. I'm going to go for dinner with my parents. And I signed up on the sheet that I wasn't going because I thought, I don't want to put this on me. I'm just having fun dancing. I don't care. And after the last performance of the mixed bill, Karen had come out on stage and she was, you know, thanking people for the show. And she came to me and she said, I hope you're coming to the party. And I said, oh, well, my parents are here and I was going to go for dinner with them. And she said, maybe you should just bring your parents. And even then I thought, okay, I'm not saying anything out loud. I'm not, you know, I thought it could be anything. It could, you know,
well, because they offer a number of different awards at that party.
But did you take the hint? Did you secretly inside you?
I mean, I was like,
oh, maybe.
Of course, but I didn't want to say it out loud. I didn't want to think it. I didn't want to get my hopes up and then have that not be the case somehow. I mean, it was pretty obvious really, but, and so, it was that same thing that when I finally just let it all go and I stopped being so anxious about everything. I mean, I'm sure that showed in my dancing. I'm sure that all this like, oh, is this right? Is this right? It would have come across, absolutely. And
I think
so,
that was my experience auditioning. And trying to get that contract back. Maybe. I don't know, looking back, like, I don't know, but it's a similar experience.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So how you're feeling emotionally can directly
when you kind of let it go,
reflect on the performance.
You can be your best self.
Absolutely.
So you showed up at that party with your parents, and then Karen promoted you.
Yeah.
I love it.
It was pretty
amazing.
My parents could actually...
and it's funny, you were in the right you were in the headspace where you just you threw it all out the window, so to speak, without literally doing that, but
because you were finding joy.
You found the essence of like
and I mean
what made you
like
happy
why I was dancing anyway. Like it just got to the point that I was thinking, I like this role. I like what I'm doing. Why am I so obsessed with this this step, this promotion? You know, like I just started going, I've done all of this. It's been pretty good. Why am I freaking out so much? Just enjoy it. Just enjoy this process. And it's that thing that everybody says, but it's so hard to do. And I think sometimes you just get to the point that you're fed up, and so you let it all go. And that's when it works out.
Guys, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for opening up about two very different but very personal and big injuries, both mental and physical. And it really means a lot to share with our listeners two very, very different but quite similar perspectives and experiences. And it seems like you've learned a lot, and I've learned a lot, because if, God forbid, I were to ever get injured, I think we have so many resources and so many people out there to help us. And if you're a dancer struggling with injury, I would encourage you to just truly take it day by day, as cliche as that sounds. I mean, it really is a day by day process, and to not be overwhelmed by the future. And that's even when you're in a company too. And I think that's how I would approach it. And if you wanted to say any last words of advice on this, please do so. But I think you both hit the nail on the T, or the T on the nail. What is
nail on the head?
Nail on the what was the T part? Why did I bring T into that?
Golf. Unless
there's
you're drinking
golf
tea.
and woodworking and all sorts of things.
I think I had golf in my mind because we were watching President Trump's press announcement that he gives every day, and
you just thought of golf.
Talking about golf. I don't know. Golf was in the back of my head.
No, I think like Jill said, reach out, don't be afraid to ask for help. I totally agree with that, because you never know who you're going to come in contact with and who you're going to have like a lasting relationship with afterwards, and what you're going to learn from those experiences. And like, keep that with you, keep perspective. And one of the hardest things in this career is to be confident, at least for me. And I think a lot of those feelings of anxiety and not being sure of yourself that you shoved down for a long time, which I think I did when I was like trying to really like just fight for it, and don't give in to the fact that like you're a little bit broken. Like let yourself heal and take the time. Also, like Jill said, it'll catch up to you. And I think now that's even something I struggle with is anxiety and confidence in the studio. And like, take the time to let yourself heal, reach out to people that are gonna want to help you, and you'll find a lot of support out there, and that will make like a huge difference in your career, in your life, and just like how you identify yourself as a dancer, how you carry yourself through the world.
I love
I think for sure I think you'll be amazed how generous people really are with their time and with their knowledge. I mean, people will be absolutely willing to help. And sort of to Jackie's point, the confidence is a big thing, and reaching out to other dancers, I think, is a really good idea. I remember as a young dancer thinking, oh, the principal dancers in the company, they must never have any confidence issues. Like, I couldn't even fathom that they could possibly be like that. And, of course, now I'm in this situation, I'm like, of course I do. Of course I go through crises of confidence, and, the times that you don't have a great show and you feel like, oh, I was in the middle and everybody saw that. And, of course there's all those issues. And so I think a lot of dancers who are more senior, or somebody that even looks like they have a ton of confidence, can be helpful in helping somebody come back, or even if they're not injured, whatever they're struggling with in the studio. I always, like I say, I always felt like I had to put on a brave face, and I never really wanted to let anybody know if I wasn't feeling confident. And now I know that it's kind of a universal thing. There's very few people who are just completely confident.
Yeah, I mean, even conversations like this, like I feel like I learned so much about your experience, Jill, like things I didn't know about your injury. And it's just, that's nice to chat about, to share our experiences with one another.
Well, have a great rest of your day.
Thanks,
it's nice
guys.
that the sun's staying out a little bit later.
Yeah,
I've been eating
there.
dinner we've been eating dinner like 8:30.
Yeah.
Which is like super late for us.
Yeah, I feel like we haven't been dancing so hard all day, so we don't get hungry as early.
Yeah.
And I remember like coming home from work, you're just starving. You're dancing for 6 hours, and now we're just kind of like lounging around, and I'm like, oh, it's 9 o'clock. I guess we should eat dinner.
I suppose dinner must happen.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks, Jill.
It was good to see you.
Great seeing
Yeah,
you.
you too. Take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Take
Bye.
care.
Thanks for listening to A Seat at the Bar. This podcast has been brought to you by me, Skylar, here in my apartment in downtown Toronto. I'd also like to thank my friend and colleague at the National Ballet of Canada, Joe Chapman, for lending me the necessary equipment for recording this. If you loved this episode, head over to iTunes or wherever you're listening to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's much appreciated. Also, be sure to follow us on our Facebook and Instagram page for the latest news on what SCDC is doing to bring dance closer to you. Until next time, be well.